All right, we would like to thank Mr. James Aros and Ms. Rebecca Lopez Kriss for being with us. Mr. Aros, let me start with you. One of the number one questions we've been receiving from people is, what does your office do and how do you do it? So could you just very briefly walk us through that?
Sure. So at the OPA, we are tasked with valuing all real property in the city of Philadelphia for purposes of ad valorem taxation. Ad valorem meaning at value. So we estimate what real property in the city is worth if it were to transact on the open market at 100% or what the full transaction price could be. So, and I say ad valorem tax purposes, our estimates are used to generate tax revenue, but we do not ourselves tax or collect or bill or consider tax implications in our valuation process. So that's a little bit of a separation between us and our colleagues over at revenue. But when we value property, we use standard appraisal techniques that are very similar or in some cases identical to what you would get if you had a fee appraisal. So a fee appraisal is for one property for a specific period of time. And if you've purchased a property or you've refinanced on your mortgage or perhaps need to get an estimate of what a property was worth to settle an estate matter, you would get a fee appraisal, which is an appraiser comes out, takes information about your property and looks at comparable sales in the area to estimate what that property is worth as of a certain time. We do a lot of the same techniques, but what we do is considered mass appraisal. So Philadelphia has approximately 580,000 parcels in the city. So we can't do every one of those individually every year with going out and checking the characteristics and looking at each one individually with sales. So what we do is we group similar properties together and we look at sales of properties that are similar to that over a period of time. And we estimate what a value is worth for those properties using standard mass appraisal modeling techniques. And some of the things we consider when we look at what a property could be worth is size and age of a property, the location, so where is it at in the city, what condition is the property in, and then we look at sales in those areas and see what the difference is when we take into consideration what properties have different characteristics. So for instance, if your property is larger than something else, is that a positive adjustment, a condition of somebody that's completely renovated versus somebody that hasn't updated their property in maybe 20, 30 years. All those kind of things are taken into consideration when we put our estimates of value out there.
Okay. And I'd like to turn it over to Denise Clay Murray.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Aros. I really appreciate it. I guess my first question for you is, tell me a little bit about, do you have a civil service? Is this a civil service position, or does the mayor, did the mayor select you all? Did council have a say in your confirmation?
My personal confirmation was that was submitted by the mayor, confirmed by council. Our employees here, for the most part, are civil service employees, so they're taking the standard city tests, specific tests in some cases for this office, but those are civil service appointees.
Were you kind of surprised by some of the reactions that you've gotten from people in neighborhoods regarding the assessments and the changes in the taxes that people are looking at?
So as I mentioned before, we're not looking at the tax implications specifically because we're tasked with getting the property values, our estimates as accurate as possible. And then the tax piece could go a number of different ways between council, the mayor, and any other relief measures. But I think what we've seen in the last few years in Philadelphia since the last reassessment has in some cases been what you might consider historic growth at a citywide level and in specific neighborhoods. So the fact that we've seen some significant changes in certain parts of the city does not necessarily come as a surprise in that, we expected that there could be some potential differences having read and followed what was going on in the market. And we know that individuals may not, know exactly what their neighbors' houses are selling for, or have a sense of what their own property may be worth if they've been living there for a long time and they haven't refinanced their mortgage, they don't have a recent appraisal. So naturally, when folks see potential for a significant change, I think that always makes them stop and think, okay, maybe I wasn't expecting this much, but over the last 3 years since the last time we did a reassessment, we've seen a lot of growth in a lot of sectors of the city.
Now, in other counties, when they do reassessment, it's revenue neutral. Does Philadelphia do revenue neutral assessment? If not, why not?
I can hop in here, AJ. So I think it's just important to remember that Mr. Arrows's job is, his sole purpose is to make sure that the assessments are correct. Like that is the whole thing. He doesn't worry about revenue neutral. He doesn't worry about, what city council might do for relief. His sole job is to make sure that those assessments are correct. And I think that nobody's surprised. Nobody's surprised about, given what we've all been through in the last few years and what we've all watched, and anybody who's tried to buy a house, nobody's surprised about some of the growth that we've seen in assessments. I think from the finance perspective, Philadelphia does not have any sort of like revenue neutral sort of clause in its real estate tax. But what I think is important is that the mayor has proposed a number of things to offer relief, where basically the gap, the additional revenue that we're going to see coming to the city and to the school district will go right back to taxpayers in the form of relief. So he's proposed an increase to the homestead exemption, so that will reduce the tax, real estate tax for homeowners. He's also proposed expanding something called the Longtime Owner Occupants Program, like the LOOP program, which protects folks who have lived in their home for over 10 years and meet certain income requirements. And also he's proposed reducing the wage tax. And so all of those things all together are basically cost the same as what the estimated increase in tax revenue.
So if, you said that the idea is to make sure that the assessments are correct. How long did it take to do this series of assessments? Was it like over a few months? Was it a few weeks? How long did this take?
Sure. So a standard assessment cycle, we start the process several months ahead of when we finish. So typically when we certify in the spring, and we will start that process sometime late summer to fall of the prior year. But everything we do every day kind of goes towards the next reassessment. So if we are collecting data on a property, or if we're changing something, putting on a value for new construction or subdividing a property, like those are all pieces towards any reassessment, and that's part of the daily work. But specifically as far as our modeling and statistical analysis process, that usually starts in late summer, early fall. And one other thing I would point out, so every day we collect sales and validate sales of properties throughout the city. That's an ongoing process that happens every day, but that's all part of what goes into a typical reassessment.
Now, and because I'm a geek, this is a geek question, I admit. How many houses are in Philadelphia, right now? I mean, can you answer that question? Because like I said, I know it's a geek question, but it's something I've always wondered about.
So there are over 580,000 parcels of real property in the city of Philadelphia. Not all of those are single family necessarily, or houses. It's vacant land. It's properties that have air rights that you don't see it, but it's there, and there may be something associated with that. So residential is over, I believe over 400,000 parcels, and that's single family, small, multifamily. So that's, I don't have the exact number on the top of my head, so I don't want to guesstimate any further,
Understand.
but you know, there's total citywide, there's over 580,000 parcels of real estate.
I can
Now-
tell you, I can also tell you that the Department of Revenue, using census data, estimates that there are about 325,000 owner occupied properties in Philadelphia. So I think that's also an important number to keep in mind.
Okay. Now, do you assess single family homes differently than you do apartment houses, or is it all done the same?
Well, we would, when I was talking a little bit earlier about our you know, what we look at and the sales analysis. So single family homes are compared to each other, multifamily homes are compared to each other. So a single family residence is not in the same sales model or using the same sales to estimate value as a small apartment, let's say 2 to 4 units. And those 2 to 4 unit apartments are not used in the same sales model as a 100 unit apartment building or a 500 unit apartment building. So we do separate those out into different buckets and to different models for analysis.
Thank you. I guess my final question, you have a city that's filled with neighborhoods, some that are, you know, doing pretty well from a housing stock standpoint and things looking, you know, livable. And then you have some neighborhoods that are in really bad shape, mostly because poverty is also involved. But the reassessment is coming and taxes have gone up on everybody, including the people in those neighborhoods where there's a lot less income. Are you, you know, I guess, could people see this series of assessments as a way of, as a signal to not necessarily try and improve their neighborhoods as much as they could, or could they see it as kind of being penalized for trying to improve their neighborhood?
So the best way I can answer that is to say, you know, we are agnostic as to who lives in a neighborhood or what any kind of makeup in a neighborhood is. What we're looking at is, you know, what we call in the industry, the bricks and the sticks. What is there? What are properties that are in this condition, have the same characteristics selling for? So if a property is in a state of disrepair compared to others, we would expect to see a difference in sale price for that. But if properties that are in, say, a state of disrepair are selling for a certain amount, we are obligated to try to value it as best we can. And we would use sales of those properties, whether the values have gone down, gone up, or stayed the same. It's our goal just to get the values as accurate, as equitable, and uniform as possible. And we're not looking at the fact that changing a value could impact how somebody wants to maintain their neighborhood or maintain their own house. That's their personal decision. But we have to say, okay, well, your house is in this condition at this very moment. The sales of property similar to yours are going for this, and that's where our estimate of value comes from. And when it comes to everything else, we have to stop right there because that's the data, that's the numbers, and that's the information about the specific property.
Okay.
I think
I'd
it's also just really important to remember that, you know, a person's home is typically their largest asset. And so, I mean, I think the mayor said it in his press conference that, or I'm sorry, in the press release that rising home values in Philadelphia reflect Philadelphia as a place of choice to live. And, you know, I think whether or not we can't speak to whether or not a person decides to improve their home or not, but when they do see an increase in value in their personal assets or their personal net worth. So, I mean, it's up to them. As Mr. Aros said, it is up to them. It's a personal choice, but I think they also see a benefit from improving their property and improving their neighborhood.
Okay. I'd like to turn this over to my co-host, Larry McGlynn.
Thanks, Denise. And I have a geek question I want to ask too. And let me preface this by saying I probably won't understand the answer. I was an English major, so this is foreign territory for me. But what I'm interested in, can you tell us a little bit about the software you use to make these assessments and the algorithm that you've developed.
Sure. So from a high level, we use what what are considered in the industry standard modeling techniques. So we have a system known as CAMA, Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal, which we just implemented, which maintains a lot of the data and information about our properties. And then both in the CAMA and outside, we can use program known as SPSS, which is a piece of modeling software. And basically, we go through and write up and take the sales and do an analysis through that, and basically write a script that creates a model. And the model will take all the sales information and comparing those sales against each other and where there are differences, come up with a set of coefficients that can be applied to the data set of the entire city. So what could an off-street parking spot be worth in certain neighborhoods? What is the difference between a property that was built very recently versus one that's 100 years old? All those kind of things, the modeling process picks up and determines what the value of each is and how those compare to each other. And then we take those coefficients and apply that to the master data set of the city to come up with our estimates of value for the real property.
Nightmares of high school math class just went right before my eyes. But
no, that's college level stuff. That's totally calculus.
Well, the college math that I took was math without numbers, designed specifically for English majors. But I do think I understood some of it. But so what I'd like to shift to a little bit are the relief options for property owners. And Ms. Kriss Lopez, Kriss, I think this is more of your wheelhouse here. So can you tell us briefly what are some of the, you had mentioned a couple earlier, but what are some of those things that people can do and how can they apply for these programs?
Sure. So I think the most important thing that every homeowner should know is that they should be enrolled in the homestead exemption. The homestead exemption reduces the taxable value of the property. Currently, most homeowners save about $629 every year. You don't have to reapply. Once you're in the program, you are in unless there's a change to your deed. As I mentioned, the mayor has proposed increasing the homestead, and I think that we can expect to see that. So it's really, really important that people apply. They can do that online at www.phila.gov/homestead, which has all the information. There is no income requirements. There's no age requirements. It's if you own and live in your home, you are eligible. If you don't use the computer, you can call a hotline, which is 1-215-686-9200. And those folks will help walk you through. I also think, like a lot of people forget that they ever did it. It might be good to just check to make sure you have it. You can do that on the property.phila.gov website. And also the homestead hotline can help you with that. So that's the first really important program that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of. Another really important program is called the Senior Citizen Tax Freeze, which essentially freezes the taxes for folks. So basically it freezes your real estate taxes so they don't ever increase, or even if the rate or the assessment increases. This is basically a program only for seniors who meet certain eligibility requirements. They need to meet certain income requirements, and all of those details. In fact, we're about to publish a new blog post about it. But all of those details are on our website, but you can also find them at www.phila.gov/senior-freeze. The applications and all that stuff is there. We encourage you to apply by September, but you actually have until January to apply for that program. What we say is if you apply by September, you'll actually see these programs on your real estate tax bill, but a lot of them have due dates further on in the year. So there is a lot of time for people to figure this out. So I just want to stress that, like, people don't need to freak out about getting into something, but there is time. You should do it, but there is time. And the other really, really important program, which was designed specifically for folks who've lived in a neighborhood for a long time and are suddenly surrounded by very quickly, rapidly increasing assessments, is called the Long Time Owner Occupant Program. This, again, there's an income qualification, and you have to have lived in your home for 10 years. But if your assessment increases by 50% after we account for the homestead, that your assessment increase will be capped at that 1.5 times amount. And that's for as long as you are eligible for the program. So it is a very, very powerful tax abatement for folks who meet those income requirements and have lived in their home for 10 years. Again, it's www.phila.gov/loop. Right. I mean, I expect that, for a long time, like, folks weren't eligible for loop because assessments were delayed. So nobody was getting a 50% increase to their assessment, but this is the year that people should be taking a look at it. And the calculation is a little hinky. I will completely acknowledge the calculation about whether or not you're eligible is hinky, but we've provided kind of examples on our website. And we also have a really great flyer that helps walk people through the math on that.
How many people use the loop program right now?
About 15,000 people,
Okay.
and they save about $22 million a year.
Okay. Now, a question that we got from somebody, a resident in my district, actually, not too far from where I live, apparently. The person said she's a senior citizen who kind of just misses all the requirements for everything except the homestead exemption, I think. She just misses the requirement for the senior tax freeze and just misses loop. So when we're looking at people who kind of slip through the cracks a little bit, what are some things they can be looking at right now to help possibly bring their potential bill down?
Well, one thing that I'd say is I'd encourage that person to look at the income requirements now. Every year, the income requirements for senior freeze are tied to a state number. If you qualify for PACENet with the Commonwealth, you also qualify for the senior freeze. And every year, well, not every year, but the state often will increase that. So this year, the income requirements were increased. So I would encourage that viewer to check out the new income requirements and just double check that she might not be eligible. The other thing is, if you find yourself in trouble and you cannot pay your taxes, the city has very, very progressive payment agreements for folks who are homeowners. So even if, there are, for folks who are very low income, there are payment agreements that are $0 a month. So I think if you find yourself in trouble and absolutely cannot pay your bill, please reach out to the Department of Revenue, because there is going to be a payment agreement. Everyone qualifies for an UPA. It's an owner occupied payment agreement, UPA. And I call them super UPAs now that there's a $0 amount like possibility. But basically everyone qualifies for that program. The question is, what is your income? And that determines the terms of the agreement. So if you're a higher income person, for whatever reason, and you're not able to make those payments, you're going to have a different terms than someone who's living completely on like Social Security.
So somebody could call the revenue department and have that conversation. Is there an application?
There is an application, phila.gov/OOPA, phila.gov/UPA, and all that information is there. We've also translated that application. Oh, and speaking of translations, the homestead exemption application has been translated into 8 languages. So if you don't feel comfortable doing it online and don't want to call the hotline, which does have language access, by the way, you can look and get a paper application in your language, in 8 languages, I should say.
Okay. This may not be a question for either one of you, actually, but if you have an answer, if people have tangled titles, can they still apply for these programs, some of these programs?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. People who are in a tangled title are entitled to UPAs, homestead, senior freeze, and now we have updated, together with City Council and with some external stakeholders, have updated the regulations to extend that to folks in loop. So yes, if you have a tangled title, you are qualified for these programs. The idea is that you will resolve your tangle title. So we ask you to affirm that you're going to work on that and resolve your tangle title. So that is part of the application, and you need to have some more documentation that shows that you've lived in the property for the period that you say that you've lived in it.
Okay. When we talk about the homestead exemption, you know, the plan right now that's going through city council is to raise it to about $65,000 per household.
Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is the homestead exemption can be 50% of the median home value in,
Right,
okay,
right.
which to me
Which
looks
is a
like about,
very wonky calculation.
and again, not a math guy. So, but my quick math found that the average or the median home value in Philadelphia is about 180,000, which would make the homestead possible to be up to 90,000.
Mhm.
Do you think we could see that homestead exemption value raise over the course of this period of trying to be able to help people with these new assessments?
I really can't speak to what city council is going to do. And I think we won't know the final number about like that value, what is that median value, until we're able to get until the entire assessment data set is published. So I do expect to see a lot of debate about the issue. So I think people should pay attention. And no matter what, they should sign up for it. So
and
I mean,
piggyback on that, we're in the process of calculating that number right now. So we should have that hopefully in the next week or so to the mayor and the city council. So that way, if there are any discussions about what that final number should be, that new median will be involved in the process.
Okay. Would you ever consider automatic enrollment for homestead?
we would love to be able to do that, but we unfortunately are not able to. We don't have the data. Like, we kind of have an estimate of the number of people who are an owner occupied person, like household, but we don't know, like, just because it's a residential property, we don't know if it's owner occupied. It could be a rental, it could be vacant, it could be somebody's home that they don't live in all the time. Maybe they have a second home, but they live in Florida or something. So without a person telling us that that house is their primary residence, we don't know. I mean, that's just what I would love to be able to do, is to encourage people who are buying a home to live in, that they just do it right as part of their settlement process, or part of their closing process. I don't know how I ever would make that happen, but yeah, we are exploring auto enrollment in other programs though. So if you apply for an UPA or senior freeze, and we see that you don't have homestead, we will automatically put it on your property. Like, if you qualified for those programs, you have to be owner occupied, so you should have homestead. So we'll auto enroll you in those programs. We're also working, so if folks don't know, the city also has some really, really great water affordability programs. So we're also trying to work with the water department and look at, if we know that a person is qualified for the senior water discount, they should qualify in many cases for the senior freeze. The question is, how do we figure out if they're actually own their home? So we're working on ways to cross enroll folks. And I mean, and you might see that in a lot of our applications. We've even updated the signature language. Like, we might use this information to enroll you in other programs, which is sort of legalese that we were required to put in there so that people understand that we're working on that.
Okay. And the last thing I'd like to ask you, and this is, again, maybe this is kind of a crystal ball kind of question, looking down the road a little bit, but the current assessments that just came out last week really didn't, I think maybe only incorporated the first quarter of 2021. Is that about right? And the rest of 2021 wasn't really?
So yeah, so the cutoff date for any sales information would have been June 30th of 2021, but due to some lags in getting the data in, recording, and based on when we have to sort of start our analysis, we had very little 2021 data that went into these assessments. So these assessments, for the most part, are reflective of market movements through the end of 2020, with some limited 2021 data incorporated as we were able to. But as I mentioned, we we were not in a place to have like the full first half of 2021 available to us by the time we had to start the process for the reassessment.
So the concern that we've been hearing from people is, okay, we didn't have 2021 necessarily reflected in this assessment. A lot of houses went for a lot of money, more than they'd ever gone in certain neighborhoods before. The next assessment, whether it's 2022 or 2023, could we see a similar kind of increase because of these inflated home values?
So, I mean, in general, I would say that if folks are following the market, you know, and kind of have a sense of what's going on, they should expect that anytime there's a reassessment, that reassessment will reflect any market trends one way or another since the last reassessment. So that's one of the benefits, I guess you could say, of doing yearly reassessments, which, you know, OPA is committed to doing ongoing regular reassessments. Ongoing regular could be as frequently as every year. And when you see a market that has changed as much as it has over a period of years, like we saw between the last reassessment and this one, if it's pretty dramatic, then folks are seeing that kind of potentially large change all at once. Doing it year over year sort of mitigates that, no matter what the details are, as whether properties are going up, down, or in some cases staying the same. Like if the market were to be flat for a decade, we wouldn't be adjusting values just for the sake of it. It would be, you know, based on what we see in the market. So if the market, but, you know, we did see, and we have seen, and to what you were speaking of a moment ago, in some cases, 1 year of data shows very significant changes in certain markets of the city. So if we were to do a reassessment using any new data, all of that would be incorporated in the process, and we would expect that new assessments would be reflective of any market trends.
Okay. Well, Rebecca Lopez, Kriss, and James Aros, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.